As we begin this hour, I would like to ask Brother Josh. So I'm so glad that you're able to be back with us, Josh. You're feeling well. Could you please lead us out in prayer for this hour together?
Father, thank you so much for this day. Thank you so much for the air that we're breathing right now, Lord. Thank you so much that we have this technology in 2025 to be able to connect with people of like-minded believers of like precious faith. That we can just come here and hear from Pastor Recker what he has, what you've provided him to be able to teach us, Lord. I just pray that we would all have ears to hear tonight, Lord, and that we would just learn about what you want us to learn and to just focus on that. Just be so grateful that you preserved your word for us today, that we have it. And we're just so thankful for that. And we pray for the presentation, Lord, that you'd just guide and be present among us here tonight, Lord. We love you and thank you. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
And
All
so,
right.
Liz,
Uh-huh.
yeah, or Esther, take it over. And I just want to say this before you begin. I'm so
Sure.
glad that you've chosen this as your subject. It's a great subject. And so take it over. There you go.
Okay, sure. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about Tel Amarna, its biblical significance, and I chose it because I always loved Egyptian history and like ancient Egypt, and so this was like a really nice integration of that, and to bring the Bible into kind of that interest I've always had since I was younger. All right, let me go here. Okay, so the outline is so where is the Tel El Armana, Doctor? We spoke about it a little bit last week, so thank you, Pastor Matt. What was found in Tel Armana? And then most of this is going to be what is the biblical significance of this discovery? All right, so Bible connections. So the reason why I love this class, I know I've spoken to Brother Tim about this too, is just this taking the the geography as well as the archaeology and just bringing them together. And so I guess the verse that hits me for this is Genesis 15:18 to 21. And here is that covenant the Lord made with Abram. And the key thing is here, unto thy seed I've given this land. And he talks about all these nations or city states that we've been talking about. And then verse 21, he says, and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Girgashites and the Jebusites. And so a lot of this will be about the Canaanites. Okay. All right. So here is a picture of the ruins of the Amana administrative complex. And so this is in Egypt. And so I'll give you a little map about where it is. All right. So we learned last week that it's about the relocation of the Egyptian capital to Tel El Armana by the heretical king Akhenaten. Okay. And so due to a religious reform to a monotheistic form of idolatry that this king did, he moved the capital from Luxor or ancient Thebes, which is in blue, to Akhetaten, the city of a horizon of Aten, which is a sun god. And this is the area now known as Tel El Armana, which is that red area. So this area functioned mainly as an administrative center, and it was abandoned in 1335 at the end of that reign. And so essentially this area pretty much stayed no one touched it for all those years. And so it was pretty much intact, and that's the beauty of this area. So what was found in Tel El Armana? So this is an example of some of the tablets of some of the Armana letters that are at display at the British Museum. And um, you know, when I turned 30, I went to London and went to the British Museum. It has probably one of the most spectacular Egyptian exhibits that you can find. And so I probably saw this and didn't really understand what it was and what the significance of it was. So let's talk about now what the Armana letters are. So in our Bible Atlas, this is map 27. So they're small blockish clay tablets, and they were letters to the Pharaoh. And basically, it's foreign correspondence from all the kings or mayors from the Levant area. And so now we know the Levant area is this area right here, right? It says Canaan right here. And it's modern day Israel, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. We know that it was written in Akkadian. It's an Assyrian-based language. And so the writing system they used was cuneiform. So in 1887, this intact area, there was over 300 tablets found. And I think up to this point, they say there's 382. So this abbreviation EA means El Armana. So if they're referring to tablet one, it'll be EA1 and then EA 382. So these tablets actually bring out the political customs and the circumstances around Canaan around the time of the Exodus, right? So it gives them evidence and information about what was going on around that time. Okay, so I didn't know the Met Museum also at Fifth Avenue also has a great Egyptian exhibit. And so I didn't know that there was actually there's two of these tablets in our Met Museum on Fifth Avenue. And so this is an example of a royal letter from the king of Assyria. And this is kind of an example of like culturally what the political relationships were. So here I highlighted, I send you a splendid chariot, two horses, and one date stone of genuine lapis lazuli as a greeting gift. And he sent it to the pharaoh with a messenger. So that's kind of what is said on that tablet. Okay, so what is the biblical significance? And so basically, a lot of what was on the tablets, if we needed to go back to the Bible, would probably be in the book of Joshua or the book of Judges. So these would be events maybe and related to people in those books. So one of the main, I guess, people that are mentioned in these tablets, we heard about that last week, is the Habiru, Hapiru or the Apiru. So it depends on who did the translation of the tablet. If we read in our Holman Bible Atlas, it is a term that designates a social status, not an ethnic identity. People of little social prestige, foreigners, or people with limited rights and opportunities, often maybe state servants that are in a royal administration, unskilled laborers, or people who are considered outcasts. So I was researching, and so the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Theology kind of goes back to the Bible. And so it says that Hebrews is actually used more frequently, maybe 22 times as compared to the word Israelite, the Hebrew word, which is mentioned 2 times and actually means children of Israel. And it's a longer term. And so people would prefer to use the word Hebrews instead. So the word Hebrew is first mentioned in Genesis 14:13, where it describes Abram. And so it says Abram the Hebrew. But it actually also, a earlier form of the word Hebrew is mentioned in Genesis 11:14. And Salah lived 30 years and begat Abram. Okay, and so that is a precursor to the word Hebrew, is what people think about. So I went to the Blue Letter Bible. So in 14:13, the Hebrew word for Hebrew means one from beyond. And then if you look lower here under Strong's definition, it also says it's a patronymic form of H5677, which is the word used in Genesis 11:14, or Aber. And that word or name means the region beyond also. And if you look here at the bottom here, it says Aber is perhaps an eponym of Hebrews, or kind of the origin of the word Hebrews. Okay. All right. So, wait. So here, really what I wanted to go back to is to say that the Armstrong Institute is saying that this is really started as an ethnic word and then probably moved to become a word that was used for all those social terms that we had first talked about. So just wanted to say that it was probably used more to refer to that ethnic group of the Israelites. So the second tablet that's at the Met Museum is a royal letter from the King of Tyre. And in this article I was reading, they talk about the conquest territory by territory. And there's about 15 of them that they make reference to So they say Armana letter, this is what it says, and then the Bible, they make a reference to what was probably what they were describing. So in the Armana letter in this tablet, it's the king of Tyre talking, writing about neighboring Sidon, and it's between two tablets, EA 148 and 228. And then in Joshua 11, it actually talks about Joshua conquers Hazor, which is in red, number 8, and chases the enemy all the way down to Sidon. And so I picked verses 10 and 11, which really just describes, and Joshua at the time turned back into Hazor. And the other verse talks about how they smote Hazor and burnt Hazor with fire. Okay, so this is an example of that tablet, and in it they say for this one, the entire land is afraid of the troops of the king, my lord. And essentially, a lot of the summaries, if you look at the other conquests, does talk about that these kings or mayors of the city are afraid of this group of people called the Habiru. When you look at the Met Museum, unfortunately, they don't make any reference to the fact that it could be referring to the Canaanite invasions. They don't make any reference to the Bible, so I'm going to leave it there. So if you do look for that, they don't make any reference to it. So the article that I used is the Armano letters, proof of Israel's invasion of Canaan. And what I really liked about it is those 15 conquests, territory by territory, and the citations from the Armano letter to the Bible. And then here's a QR code for anybody who might be interested. It'll link you right to that article at the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. Okay, so thanks a lot, everyone. And that's the end.
That was fantastic. Funny thing, I was doing a little research, Esther, and I came to that
Yeah.
same article, and I actually printed it out. And the lettering didn't come out properly, but I found that article also very good. So you and I were on the same page there.
Yeah, it was a very well written article.
So why do you think the author, even of the Holman Atlas, he kind of puts down the idea that the Habiru are the Hebrew people? And you even referenced that they're not even mentioned, there's no connection in the Met or anything. Why do you think our author doesn't believe that I mean, because what you showed such a clear connection between the Jewish people and one of these letters between Hazor and chasing them. I mean, what a absolutely clear connection. So why do you think that?
So I guess the Holman Bible Atlas, even though given it was Christian, there even that article was saying that there's so many it's controversial. And so I think that's what happened. He followed whoever it was that he followed and said that, sorry, I'm trying to move you guys over. um, and so he said that some people just take it as a social term, right? So it's a very derogatory term, and so then it started to be used for everybody, and so he followed that route. Whereas the author of this article said, "Hey, we're going to use the Bible, right, and to figure out where did this term come from in terms of the etymology of the word, which I love. I was like, oh, I didn't know it meant like a descendant of this person, Aber, right? And it actually is like they say, it's like it sounds the same, and then it just ended up, and because Abram is not from that Canaanite region, right? He's from on the other side from but yet he was described as Abram the Hebrew.
Okay, are there any other questions that you have?
Anybody? I don't know. I thought it was fun, but it you can't do much in 7 minutes.
Well, I thought you did a great job. Having a hard time. I'm not sharing anything, right?
No,
No, what's going on here? Can't. Oh, here we go. Here we go.
you got it.
You know what it? All right, hold on one second.
Am I still sharing? Is that why?
No,
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 I thought I.
no, it's not you.
Okay.
Okay, now I'll get to it. Okay, so let's we'll get ready for this. And if we could open up our Holman Atlas then to this chapter, chapter 7. And then we're gonna get to page 32 in our book, in our class notes. Okay. And so you all see that, right?
Now, yep, we do know.
And how far, what was the last blank that you have filled in? Did we get to the geography of Sinai, right? On page 33?
We just finished Southern Granite Mountains. The geography of Sinai, yes, the last one there.
Yeah. Okay, so
Point C.
yes, we were talking about the Sinai Peninsula and this triangle of land with the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba on the east. Okay, and so we were just talking a little bit about the geography of Mount Sinai here. And so here's the Sinai Peninsula, here's the Gulf of Suez, here's the Gulf of Aqaba. And so we want to talk about the route of the Exodus. And this was truly a landmark study that I did the first time we did this class. I had not realized what the a biblical route for the Exodus was. And so it was really quite exciting. And they have done quite a few, there's been some new geographical findings, I believe, that really refute some of the traditionally held views of the route of the Exodus and traditional places such as the traditional Mount Sinai, which would be down here. So we're going to talk about this in a moment. But just as far as the geography of Sinai, the northern coastal plain, that would be this area in our notes where it says the north, this would be the wilderness of Shur over here. And then the central plateau, a barren, waterless, more flat wilderness. So that central plateau would be more, I believe, in this region. And then the southern granite mountains, that would be down in the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula. And the most impressive of those mountains is Jebel Musa. So that's the last blank here on the screen, letter C. That's the Mount of Moses, and this is the traditional mountain identified as the Mount Sinai, where Moses received the commandments of God. Now, we're going to see this word Jebel pretty regularly. That simply means mountain. So I do not believe that the biblical Mount Sinai is in Mount Sinai, and we'll talk about that. So now the route of the Exodus. There are many different possible routes. So it's not as if we can be 1,000% sure, but there's very strong geographical evidence, and I'm not alone in the presentation that I'm sharing with you in this class. But there are three basic routes, and they're illustrated in our book. And if you turn there to map number 29, and that's on page 66, the route of the Exodus. So there's a northern route, which would be the green line. There's a central route, which is the purple line. And then there is a red route, which is the southern route. I do not agree to either of these three. This is just what the book says. The location of Mount Sinai and possible route theories. And then I have in your notes here that there are a proposed 20 different locations for Mount Sinai. So there's no real ultimate consensus opinion of this. This is a picture of Jebel Musa, which is the Mount of Moses, the traditional mountain. Okay, now on page 34, The Gulf of Aqaba and the Gulf of Suez are extensions of the Red Sea. Notice again in this map how it says Red Sea down here. And so then it goes into the Gulf of Suez. This would be considered the Red Sea. And this is also the Gulf of Aqaba. And we will read a verse where this body of water we call the Gulf of Aqaba is called in the Bible the Red Sea. And I did not know that. I always assumed that they crossed the Gulf of Suez somewhere in the Exodus when Moses divided the Red Sea. That was a wrong assumption, I believe. So that the Hebrew for that, and I have this in your notes, is Yam Suf. And I don't know if I'm saying that properly, but Yam, Yamsuph, Suf. Okay, so just very quickly, I have here and I just have a few pictures. This is the same blanks. This is just different pictures. These mountains are all spectacular though. And this is the traditional Mount of Moses. And we'll talk about how that became the traditional mount. Now, this is a mountain that is actually in Saudi Arabia or Midian. If you look there, that's on the other side of the Gulf of Aqaba. And I'm going to make a case that this mountain, Jebel Makla, and if you Google this, you could find some very interesting videos of proving that this mountain is the true Mount Sinai. And one of the reasons is the blackened nature of the mountain. That the mountain in the Bible was said to be on fire and smoke. And notice how this mountain is blackened as if it was on fire. So this is a part of the Jebel al-Lawz range, and it is the name of the specific mountain is Jebel Makla. And that's a mountain that is being preferred by a number of conservative, Bible-believing geologists. Okay, so the three theories that are on this page 34, the northern, central, southern route theories. The northern route theory is bolstered by these 2 points. One, Moses' 3-day journey. Two, an encounter with Amalek. Remember when they came out of Egypt, they fought with the Amalekites? So again, if you go back to that map and you see Amalek is up here, so you see the green line, this is the northern route theory. So what would bolster this theory would be that they fought Amalek shortly coming out of the land in, I believe that was in Exodus, what chapter? I think Exodus chapter 16, or was that? That's chapter 17. That's chapter 17. But they were on the other side. They had crossed the Red Sea at that point, but they fought the Amalekites. So anyway, so this would be a something that would bolster the northern route theory, the encounter with Amalek. But this route is the least possible, I believe, because it says also in Exodus chapter 13 and verse 17 that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. So God did not lead them along the way by where the Philistines lived in this region of southern Canaan. So I believe that verse does discount the northern route theory. Exodus 13:17. So then there's the central route theory. This is a theory that Israel crossed the Gulf of Aqaba, and we'll talk about that. Now, he has the central route theory, though, and he has, if you notice this map, he has Israel crossing this body of water, though, in this central route theory. So I wouldn't agree to that. I can't even see, what is that body of water? It's a lake. It says Little Bitter Lake. So how could Little Bitter Lake be the Red Sea? That couldn't possibly be. So this theory, see where it says this theory, the purple, that they crossed through this lake, that would have been the Red Sea crossing. And then they came down here and came to Ezion Geber and then came down into Midian. But so I don't agree to this central route theory that the book emphasizes. But I do locate Mount Sinai in Midian. So that's the bullet point here, going back to our notes, that's the bullet point under point 2 is Midian in modern day Saudi Arabia, which is the central area. The prime, now my notes, there needs to be a little update, and I'm sorry I didn't update this properly. So if you can read this part under the bullet point with me, I'm going to make a correction, and you can please make a correction. It says the prime candidates of this view are Mount Bader, Jabal al-Lawz, Jabal Hurab, and Jabal Harb. Of these, Jabal al-Lawz is the most preferred. More of this position will be discussed below. So I wanna just refine that a little bit. I believe that Jabal al-Lawz, from my understanding now, and maybe it's even new, I did not, the first time I taught this class, I never saw Jabal Makla as a mountain, that was Mount Sinai. But now, some of the same people were saying Jabal al-Lawz are saying it's Jabal Makla. And what they say is that Jabal al-Lawz is the range of mountains, and Jabal Makla is the specific mountain. So you could do more research on that, but that's my understanding of it. So if you could just kind of refine your notes and say that Jabal al-Lawz is the mountain range and Jabal Makla is the specific mountain. You got that? Makla, and it's spelled there in the screen, Maqla. Any questions? Was that clear, or was it clear as mud?
It's clear.
Okay, good. So that's the central route. Now let's talk about the southern route theory. Exodus 13:17 warned against Israel traveling by the way of the land of the Philistines, which was the north. So because of that, people prefer the southern route theory. As you see here in the book, the southern route theory will go all the way down basically along the coast of the Gulf of Suez and down here to this traditional Mount Sinai, and then up this way. And that this would be the Red Sea crossing up here, though. In other words, the Red Sea crossing, according to the southern route theory, would be at the very top of the Gulf of Suez. That's what they would say. So Deuteronomy 1 verse 2 says Mount Sinai is an 11-day journey to Kadesh Barnea, which is a probable amount of time. In other words, a probable amount of time, 11-day journey from this region, the traditional Mount Sinai, to Kadesh Barnea, which is up here, right here. That's Kadesh Barnea, which was kind of like their main central place where they would stay during their wilderness wanderings. So Exodus 18:27 and Numbers 10 and verse 30 also may indicate that Mount Sinai is not in Midian. I'm not going to look at those verses right now. You could look at them later, but those verses some would use is to substantiate that the Mount Sinai is the traditional mountain here and not in Midian or in Saudi Arabia. Many of this position say Jabal Musa, which is again the Mount of Moses, is the traditional site of Mount Sinai. And it was really Empress Helena, the mother of Constantine, who in AD 330 AD built a church there. And she reported this site was confirmed to her as Mount Sinai in a dream. So because Constantine's mother had a dream, this became the traditional site. I believe we're going to show you some very powerful geologic reasons that this is not Mount Sinai, and that this up here in the Gulf of Suez was not the crossing of the Red Sea. So this is really why this became the preferred view, because of Constantine and his mother. And like they say, those in power have a big megaphone. They have a big voice. And so Constantine, this great leader of the early Roman Empire, and his mother, and with their power, this became an established view of the church. But I don't agree to it. Okay? Any questions up till now? Okay, so now I want to look now. We're going to keep pressing ahead here, page 35. And I want to, this is what I believe on 35 now. So we've talked about three different theories that I don't believe. This is the theory that I do believe. The Exodus route described, and it is a central route, but not exactly the one described in the book. So what we see is biblically, the Exodus began in Ramses, which was the center of the Egyptian dynasty, and they went to Succoth. So now we're going to read these verses. So I've asked you to read a number of verses. So Tim's going to start us off. And then Lorraine, if you could get ready to read the verses that I had asked you as well. So in Exodus chapter 12 and verse 37, Brother Tim, could you get us going with that?
And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot, that were men, beside children.
Okay, so here we see Ramses is over here, and they journey from Ramses to Succoth, and our book would have that as well, similar to this. Now, this map I got online, and this map agrees with my understanding of the Exodus. So we see that geographically. Now they're approaching the Red Sea. And we read these verses in Exodus chapter 13. And here, if you could please read this, and Kerry, if you could please be ready in Exodus 14 after this. But Lorraine, could you please read Exodus chapter 13? And we're going to read verses 18 to 20 here, please.
Okay, Exodus 13, 18. But God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up, harnessed out of the land of Egypt. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had straitly sworn the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones away hence with you. And they took their journey from Succoth and encamped in Etham, in the edge of the wilderness.
Okay, now when we come to this verse again, we see now they were in Succoth, so they went from Ramses to Succoth, and so here it says that then they left from there, and it says they went about through the way of the wilderness. So they took their journey from Succoth, verse 20, right? And it says that they went through the way of the wilderness. Remember the wilderness we talked about? This wilderness of Shur, the wilderness of Egypt. So they had not crossed the Red Sea yet. They don't cross the Red Sea until chapter 14. So they come out of Succoth and travel through a wilderness. So I believe right there they could not have gone through this little lake because they wouldn't have gone through a wilderness. They could not have crossed the top of the Suez Canal. They wouldn't have gone through a wilderness. So they go into the northern region of Mount Sinai through the wilderness of Shur, the wilderness of Egypt. Now, try to find in your map where it says they came to Etham. I looked it up. It's really nowhere that I could find, because these places are hard. This is why they're not exactly sure, and there's all these different views, because they don't really, geologists and geographers are not settled on where some of these places are. But it could be, and this map says that Etham is down here. So they crossed through the wilderness, they left Succoth, crossed through the wilderness, and then it says it came to Etham in the edge of the wilderness. So they crossed through the wilderness, and now they were on the edge of it, on the other side of it. Okay? So that's very interesting that they didn't just leave Egypt and cross the Red Sea. They went through a wilderness. Okay, now look in chapter 14. And Kerry, if you could please read, you could read verse 1. It's very quick. Verse 1 through 3, please.
Exodus 14, 1 through 3. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they turn and encamp before Pihahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal Zephon, before it shall ye encamp by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, They are entangled in the land, the wilderness hath shut them in.
Okay. So again, these places, if you look at now Migdol, there's a Migdol here in our map on page 29, but it's way to the north. It's right on basically on by the Mediterranean Sea, right outside of Egypt. So I don't believe it could have been, that's the same Migdol at all. And then the other places, there's another map, and I had, I had it before, and I don't think I wrote it down here. Maybe I'll have to find it for you later. But notice where it says here, it talks about Baal Zephon and Pihahiroth. The Holman Atlas has no idea where those places are. I saw one map where it had those names and then a question mark beside it, and that's where I can't remember where that map is, but it was somewhere. It's not this one. I don't think those places are referenced at all here. But in other words, they don't know where they are. So it's difficult, okay? But what he's saying here, if you look here at this map in our screen, Etham is here, so they weren't in Ethon, and then they came down to Migdol. This is where it says Migdol is, and it says Pihahiroth is down here. Now, again, that's his view. There's a lot of conjecture about that and not 100% agreement, okay? So we understand that. But the point is, what's very important here to get, and this is in the text, is what Pharaoh says is that they are entangled in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. So they were in a place where there was wilderness about them. And then we see in another place, I believe somewhere, that there were mountains as well. They were in a mountainous region. And I don't have that particular verse, but nevertheless, it says, the wilderness hath shut them in this is as they're now, letter A, out of Egypt. That's letter A. God brought them out of Egypt into the Sinai Peninsula before they crossed the Red Sea. And we read those verses. This could mean they were already in the Sinai Peninsula. So I believe they were in the Sinai Peninsula without crossing the Red Sea yet. In Exodus chapter 13, verses 21, it says, The Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud and by night. So they traveled by day and night to get to where they were at this point. Wherever Pihahiroth is and where they were entangled in the wilderness, Exodus 13, 20, and 21 says, and this is in your notes, they traveled day and night. And so it would take at least 3 to 5 days to cross Mount Sinai. And then letter C, they were entangled in the land, Exodus 14:3. So they were already out of Egypt. This would be where they would be. Where would this be except the Sinai Peninsula, is my point. This would be the Sinai Peninsula, where they traveled day and night. They went through a wilderness, and they were entangled in the land. That's what the text does say. Okay, so what many people believe now is that this part of the Gulf of Aqaba, there is a landing called Nuweiba, and it's a little peninsula. It comes out into the Red Sea a little bit, and there's a beach of about, and this is in your notes, Nuweiba Beach, I believe, fits the description of where they are, and that this is where they were delivered at the sea. And this is what others are saying, and there's some very good presentations online. Maybe I think some of you have seen them, where the Red Sea crossing was through the Gulf of Aqaba at Nuweiba Beach. So Nuweiba Beach is about 5 miles long, 3 miles wide. So that would be large enough to contain or to have all the 600,000 people coming out of Egypt. And the mountains had shut them in. It says that. Where's that verse, by the way? Can somebody get that verse for me? I know it's waters. Okay, so Nuweiba Beach. And this verse fits the Gulf of Aqaba far better than the shallow areas of the northern part of the Gulf of Suez and even other parts of the Gulf of Aqaba. They've done, as far as the depths of the water here, the depth is significant, but there's not a lot of crazy things going on the seabed. It's more of a straight cross. There's not like a lot of valleys within underneath the water. There are some difficult things like that in other parts of the Gulf of Aqaba. So even the crossing, it could have definitely happened here, just based on the depth of the water there. Okay. So now what I also need to establish is that the Gulf of Aqaba is called the Red Sea in the Bible. Okay, so do you got those blanks there? Let's see. Moses crossing. Okay, on page 36, in 1 Kings 9:26, the Gulf of Aqaba is called the Red Sea, the Yam Suf. And this is what they definitely crossed in Exodus chapter 15, verse 4, the Red Sea. And the depth at this crossing is not overly rugged, but deep enough for the waters to part. And so I have asked Timmy to read this verse for us. 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 26, Timmy, if you could read that verse for us.
And King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion Geber, which is beside Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom.
Okay, very good. Excellent, Timmy. And now here's Ezion Geber. And this is where later on Solomon will build his ships. And then they will come down the Gulf of Aqaba and gain a lot of riches and things like that from these African nations along the Gulf of Aqaba. But the point that's important for us is that the Gulf of Aqaba is called the Red Sea. That's the point of that verse. And that's very important. It's called the same Hebrew, the Yam Suf, that this region of water is called the Red Sea. So it's very possible that this is where the crossing of Moses and the nation of Israel was from the Exodus. It's called the Red Sea. And I believe that it was. So it seems they crossed at Nuweiba Beach out of the Sinai Peninsula into Saudi Arabia. The full name of this landing, Nuweiba al Muzayina, in, I believe, Arabic, it means the waters of Moses' crossing. So that's what that's what the people in this region call the Nuweiba Beach, that they call it the waters of Moses' crossing. So many people who live in this region believe this is where Moses crossed. Now, here's where it gets pretty interesting. There is an abundance of unusual and abnormal. I have other pictures here of Nuweiba Beach where they were surrounded by mountains, and there's this large area where they could cross. Remember, they wanted to retreat, but the waters were on one side, the armies were on the other, the mountains shut them in, kind of a thing. They were entangled in the wilderness. So this is Nuweiba Beach. It's quite an amazing location, isn't it? And so here's Nuweiba Beach here. So there is an abundance of unusual and abnormal coral structures right between Nuweiba Beach going into Saudi Arabia. And they have done research and dives, and these are pictures of things now that discoverers have found. And basically, it looks like coral growing on man-made structures. Coral growing on man-made structures. And there is an abundance of them. And what's also interesting, in one video that I was watching, it says this, coral is distributed like a junkyard. So they're not all in one spot, but it's like throughout the crossing. Doesn't that make sense? We're going to read in just a moment how Pharaoh sent his chariots, and it even says how the wheels fell off those chariots. And you would think that if the water deluged them, that the chariots would be, not all bunched in one place. So these coral-like structures, and some believe now, basically the coral growth will come in and disintegrate probably what's ever under there, but it maintains its original shape. So some believe that this is a coral growth that came upon, it could be chariot wheels. And that this coral is distributed like a junkyard in the aftermath of a disaster. That's what it says, that the coral is distributed like a junkyard in the aftermath of a disaster. And that the coral, it looks like it's growing on things that were engineered by humans, by human artifacts. So in other words, the coral growth is not on just rock structure, but on something made by man. So that's also very interesting. Now, let's look at some of these verses. And I have these, I've asked Jessica, Charlie, and Jacob. So Jessica, let's go to Exodus chapter 14 and verses 6 and 7 of Exodus chapter 14 and verse 6 and 7. If you could please read those first.
And he made ready his chariot, and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over every one of them.
Okay, so the point there is that there are definitely chariots that were a part of Pharaoh's attempt to bring the Israelites back. Okay, and now let's go look at verse 25, Exodus 14, verse 25. So now this is, Israel's going across now. The water has opened up, and they are going through on dry ground, beginning at verse 22. And Charlie, if you could please read verse 25.
And took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians.
Okay, so again, what we specifically see in the text is that the chariot wheels were driven so heavily that they broke off. And so it took off their chariot wheels. The chariot wheels were taken off of the chariots. So of all the places in the world where we see this kind of coral structure, now look at this one. And you can imagine that this could be a chariot wheel with a coral growing around it. And these things are throughout this part of the Gulf of Aqaba from Nuweiba Beach going to the other side. And there's one more verse I'd like to read here, Exodus chapter 15 and verse 4. Jacob, could you please read that? Jacob, is he there?
Oh, we can't hear you, Jacob.
Okay. Maybe there's
All
something.
right. Yeah, I think his audio is not working.
I can't, oh, it's not working for you, Jacob? No, we don't, it says you're muted here.
No, he was unmuted, but
Okay. Well, Jasmine, could you read that
Does
verse?
it work now?
oh yes, you
Yeah.
got it.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jacob.
Now you're muted again, Jacob. Okay, I'll read it, Jacob. Okay. Exodus 15 and verse 4, it says, Pharaoh's
Hello?
chariots.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Jacob, go for it. Okay. I don't know where he went.
He's there.
Okay. Are you going to read it, Jacob? Okay, I'm going to read it.
Yeah, he disappeared.
Pharaoh's chariots and his host hath he cast into the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. The depths have covered them. They sank into the bottom as a stone. So, so it Pharaoh had chariots, the wheels broke off, and they were buried in the depth of the sea. And this is where it seems we find them, nowhere else in any part of the Suez or Gulf of Aqaba, but in this region of the Nuweiba Beach. So it's really quite fascinating. Now, I did ask a couple people to read in the book here um, on page 68.
Does it work now?
Yes, it
No, but
does.
it's too late. It's too late, Jacob. We got it. Okay, on page 68, let me just read on the left-hand column. Who did I ask to read this?
Me, I
Esther?
got it. Deliverance at the sea, right?
Yeah, well, why don't you read on the left side, approaching the sea, and then
Okay.
deliverance. Read both of those.
Okay, all paragraphs, Pastor?
Yeah.
Okay. Approaching the sea after Succoth, Exodus mentions four sites in connection with two encampments before the deliverance of the sea: Etham, Pi Hahiroth, Migdal, and Baal Zephon in Exodus 13:20, 14:2. Despite the geographic detail, the direction of the march is uncertain. Several alternatives are possible. The Hebrews could have continued eastward, following the way of Shur, or they could have turned back north, becoming trapped in the area around Lake Menzaleh. The latter was a saltwater marsh region known in Egyptian records for the papyrus reeds that grew in the area.
Okay, that's good.
North,
That's sorry. I'm
okay,
sorry. Yeah, you can stop there.
deliverance.
Wait, hold up. The reason I wanted her to read that is because he says it's all uncertain. I just want you to see that he's not making any kind of definitive argument for anything. Okay, yeah, deliverance. Now, if you keep going, and if you could read the next paragraph, deliverance at the sea.
Okay, deliverance at the sea. Encamped at Pi Hahiroth, the Israelites found themselves caught between the sea before them and the pursuing Egyptians. In a great miracle, God parted the waters by sending a strong east wind, allowing the children of Israel to escape. Several passages call this body of water Yam Suf, sometimes translated Red Sea, but more properly Sea of Reeds, Exodus 13:18 and 15:4. Traditionally, the north end of the Gulf of Suez has been identified with the Yam Suf, but the head of the Gulf is located a considerable distance south of Sukkot. Likely the chariots of Pharaoh would have overtaken the fleeing Israelites sooner than the time required to reach the Gulf of Suez. One of the lakes bordering Egypt and the Sinai, Lake Timsha, one of the bitter lakes, seems a more likely scene of this mighty act of God.
Okay, so I just wanted to read that and get his view on that. The point, though, that's very important, again, I believe, is Exodus 15:4 says that they were drowned in the Red Sea. And the verse we read earlier is that the Gulf of Aqaba is called this Yam Suf, the Red Sea. And so it's a very strong possibility. And then I'll just kind of conclude now with showing you some of these other images. And look at this. If that doesn't look like a chariot wheel, I don't know what does. And it is quite fascinating. So you could do more research. There are some videos online. Some are an hour long, but some are maybe 10 minutes long. So it wouldn't take you that long to find some of them. Okay, so that's where we'll conclude tonight. Did you get and you have the blanks going down to letter E, the coral wrapped around the objects such as wheels, and it retains the shape of the objects. God took off their chariot wheels, and we read that. Okay, so we will stop right there. And I believe we have a quiz, another quiz. I don't know if you guys got to take the quiz. I know we're running a little late here, 9 o'clock. So have a good evening. Thank you.